In the shadowed underbelly of avarice, where the Nile's murky waters lapped against crumbling mud-brick walls stained with the blood of forgotten offerings, a whisper slithered through the night like a serpent uncoiling from the desert sands. It spoke of forbidden rites, of bodies entwined in ecstasy upon altars slick with the essence of life and death, where the god Set, lord of chaos, storms, and the alien winds that howled from distant realms, demanded tribute in flesh and fire. Young Ketchum, a priest barely escaped from boyhood, had heard that whisper in his dreams, drawing him deeper into the cult's embrace, unaware that the path he trod led not to divine power, but to a chasm of betrayal and ruin. Ketchum's initiation began under a moonless sky, the air thick with the scent of myrrh and burning papyrus as he knelt before the high priestess, Nefertari, whose eyes gleamed like polished obsidian in the torchlight. She was no ordinary woman. Rumors swirled that she was the daughter of a fallen prince from the eastern delta, married in secret to Pharaoh Seti I's own kin to seal a fragile alliance, though her true loyalties lay with the storm god's shadowy domain. "Strip away your mortal fears, Ketchum," she commanded, her voice a silken thread that wrapped around his throat. For Set demands the union of pleasure and pain to awaken his fury. Her fingers, adorned with rings of lapis lazuli etched with serpentine symbols, traced the lines of his bare chest, sending shivers through his untested frame. The other initiates watched from the edges of the temple chamber, their faces masked in linen veils, bodies oiled and ready for the ritual that would bind them all in blood. As the drums began their relentless throb, echoing like the heartbeat of the underworld, Ketchum was led to the altar. A slab of black basalt carved with scenes of Set devouring his enemies, their limbs twisted in eternal agony. Nefertari pressed him down upon it, her robes falling away to reveal skin marked with ritual scars, each one a testament to sacrifices past. "Feel the god's breath in your veins," she murmured, her lips brushing his ear as she mounted him, her movements deliberate and intoxicating, drawing forth gasps that mingled with the chants of the surrounding priests. The rite unfolded in waves of sensation, bodies joining in a frenzied dance that blurred the line between worship and depravity, the air growing heavy with the musk of arousal and the metallic tang of spilled offerings from lesser beasts. Ketchum's mind reeled, visions of storm clouds parting to reveal Set's jackal-headed form urging him onward, promising dominion over the chaos that plagued the kingdom. But as the climax approached, a darker element intruded. From the shadows emerged a bound figure, a young scribe accused of betraying the cult's secrets to the pharaoh's spies. His eyes wide with terror, mouth gagged with strips of papyrus inscribed with curses. Nefertari's hand, still warm from Ketchum's flesh, seized a obsidian blade, its edge glinting in the firelight. "The god feeds on both seed and soul," she intoned, her voice rising above the moans of the entangled initiates. With a swift motion, she plunged the blade into the scribe's chest, his blood spraying across the altar, mingling with the fluids of the rite. Ketchum felt the warmth splatter his skin, a shock that jolted him from ecstasy to horror. Yet the high priestess held him firm, her body convulsing in release as the victim's life ebbed away. The cultists cheered, their voices a cacophony of exultation. But in that moment, Ketchum glimpsed the abyss. The rite was no mere communion, but a veil for murder, a tool wielded by those who sought not divine favor, but earthly power. Days blurred into nights in the labyrinthine temples of avarice, where the cult of Set thrived amid the ruins of Hyksos invaders long vanquished, their foreign gods twisted into Egyptian forms. Ketchum, now marked with a tattoo of Set's with scepter on his thigh, delved deeper into the mysteries under Nefertari's tutelage. She revealed fragments of ancient scrolls, hidden in crypts beneath the city, speaking of rites brought by alien wanderers from the east, nomads who worshipped storms as harbingers of change, blending them with Egyptian sorcery. "Our Lord Set is the outsider," she explained one evening as they lay entwined in her private chambers, the walls adorned with murals of phallic symbols entwined with serpents. "He disrupts the order of Osiris, and through our bodies, we channel his chaos to reshape the world." Her touch was both mentor and seductress, guiding him through lesser rituals where pairs of priests and priestesses coupled upon reed mats, invoking storms that rattled the temple roofs, their cries summoning winds that scattered sand across the delta. Yet whispers of discontent filtered through the cult's ranks. Pharaoh Seti I, restorer of temples and conqueror of rebels, had turned his gaze upon avarice, suspicious of the Set worshippers who grew bold during his reign. Kachum overheard elders plotting in hushed tones during a midnight feast, where platters of roasted fowl and honeyed dates masked the tension. The pharaoh's son, Prince Ramses, has married the daughter of our high priestess's kin, one grizzled priest muttered, his beard flecked with wine. A union meant to bind us, but Nefertari twists it to our advantage. Through her, we infiltrate the court. Kachum's heart quickened. Nefertari's lineage, that prince-married daughter, was no idle tale. She was the bridge between cult and crown, her rituals a weapon in the struggle for influence. That night, as he participated in another rite, this time with a group of veiled women whose identities remained secret, he felt the weight of politics seep into the sacred. Bodies writhed in a circle around a central altar, hands exploring, lips claiming, until the sacrificial victim, a captured Hittite spy, was offered up, his throat slit amid the peak of communal passion, his blood anointing the participants in a grim baptism. As seasons turned, with the Nile flooding and receding like the tides of Set's stormy moods, Kachum rose in the hierarchy, his doubts festering like an untreated wound. He witnessed rites that pushed boundaries further. A ceremony where twins, brother and sister from a noble family, were forced into incestuous union upon the altar, their cries of reluctance drowned by hallucinogenic incense, culminating in the brothers' ritual murder to symbolize Set's triumph over harmony. Nefertari presided, her eyes alight with fervor, declaring, "In this act, we mirror the god's defiance of natural order, gaining strength to challenge the pharaoh's rigid rule." Kachum, paired with a lithe acolyte whose skin bore the scars of self-flagellation, felt revulsion mingle with arousal, the blade's descent a punctuation to their coupling that left him stained and shaken. Intrigue deepened when Kachum was summoned to a clandestine meeting in the catacombs beneath Avarice, where torchlight flickered on walls etched with hieroglyphs of ancient curses. There, Nefertari unveiled the cult's grand design, to assassinate a rival priest of Ammonius, whose influence at court threatened Set's resurgence, using a rite disguised as diplomacy. "You will lead the seduction," she instructed, her fingers digging into his arm like claws. "Draw him into our embrace, then offer his life to the god." The target was Mentuhotep, a portly advisor to Prince Ramses, whose marriage to the cult-linked daughter had unwittingly opened doors. Kachum, cloaked in deception, approached Mentuhotep under the guise of alliance, inviting him to a private ritual in a hidden chamber overlooking the river. The night unfolded with calculated allure. Incense curled through the air as dancers, their bodies painted with symbols of fertility, swayed to flutes and lyres, enticing Mentuhotep into the fray. Kachum watched as the advisor, flushed with wine laced with aphrodisiacs, shed his robes and joined the tangle of limbs, his hands roaming freely over the forms of priestesses, including one who whispered promises of eternal youth. Nefertari arrived like a specter, her presence commanding, and soon the rite escalated, bodies pressing together in a heap of sweat and sighs, Mentuhotep at the center, lost in ecstasy. Kachum, feigning participation, positioned himself near the altar, his heart pounding as Nefertari raised the blade. "For Set's glory," she hissed, driving it into Mentuhotep's back mid-thrust, his gasp of pleasure twisting into agony. Blood pooled, soaking the participants, and the cultists continued their motions, turning murder into macabre continuation. The advisor's death throws mistaken for climax by the uninitiated. This act shattered Kachum's illusions. Fleeing the chamber under cover of dawn, he sought solace in the city's bustling markets, where merchants hawked amulets against evil and scribes penned petitions to the gods. But the cult's reach extended everywhere. Spies shadowed him, and visions haunted his sleep, Set's laughter echoing as bodies piled upon altars, rivers running red. Determined to uncover the full truth, Kachum infiltrated the high priestess's archives, slipping past guards drugged with lotus essence. There, amid dusty papyri, he discovered ledgers revealing the cult's ties to Pharaoh Seti I himself. The rites funded rebellions in the south, human sacrifices masked as executions to eliminate dissenters, and Nefertari's role as manipulator, using her familial marriage, the prince wed to her cousin's daughter, to whisper poisons into royal ears. Confrontation came during the grand festival of Set, when avarice thrummed with pilgrims and the temple overflowed with offerings. Kachem, clad in ceremonial robes, stood beside Nefertari as the rite commenced. A procession of virgins and warriors pairing off in ritual copulation, their unions building to a crescendo where a chosen victim, a disgraced noble accused of treason, would be slain. But this time, the victim was no stranger. It was the prince's own emissary, sent to investigate rumors of sedition. As bodies intertwined in the torchlit hall, Kachem's resolve hardened. "This ends tonight," he whispered to himself, seizing a hidden dagger. Chaos erupted as he lunged at Nefertari during the sacrificial stroke, the blade glancing off her arm instead of piercing her heart. Cultists swarmed, but Kachem fought with the fury of betrayal, slashing through veils and flesh, blood spraying like storm rain. Nefertari screamed curses, her wounded form still commanding, "You fool! Set will claim you yet." In the melee, rites devolved into slaughter, participants turning on each other in panic, bodies falling amid the altars, the air reeking of iron and desire unfulfilled. Kachem escaped into the night, the city ablaze behind him as fires spread from overturned braziers, symbolizing Set's unchecked wrath. Wounded and hunted, Kachem fled south along the Nile, toward Thebes, where Ammonius priests might offer sanctuary. But the cult's shadows pursued, assassins striking in reed-choked marshes, their attacks thwarted only by Kachem's growing cunning. In a final vision, as he lay feverish in a hidden cave, Set appeared, not as benefactor, but as devourer, revealing that the rites were but human inventions, twisted for power by Nefertari and her ilk. Awakening, Kachem vowed to expose the corruption, even if it meant his own end upon some distant altar. Years later, whispers and avarice spoke of a reformed cult, purged of its darkest elements, but the scars remained. Altars still bore faint stains, and the wind carried echoes of moans and screams. Kachem, if he survived, became a legend. The priest who danced with death and desire, only to renounce both in pursuit of a fragile truth. Continuation of Part 1. In the veiled recesses of the Temple of Set, where the eternal sands of the desert whispered secrets to the unyielding stone walls etched with glyphs of primordial turmoil, Kachem returned from his exile not as a fugitive but as a seeker drawn inexorably back by the invisible threads of fate woven by the god of chaos himself. The flames of rebellion that had scorched avarice in his wake had not consumed the cult entirely. Instead, they had forged it anew, tempering its edges with a sharper, more insidious fervor under the guidance of a new high priest, a man named Amunher, whose eyes burned with the unquenchable fire of ancient obsessions passed down through shadowed lineages. Kachem, scarred by his past betrayals yet compelled by visions that haunted his wanderings. Visions of storm-swept horizons where Set's form merged with that of a mourning goddess, sought redemption or perhaps deeper damnation within these hallowed yet profane halls. The temple, rebuilt from the ashes with blocks hauled from distant quarries under the cover of night, stood as a monument to resilience, its corridors labyrinthine and alive with the faint echoes of chants that stirred the air like unseen winds. As the sun dipped below the jagged silhouette of the western mountains, casting long shadows that danced like serpents across the Nile's rippling surface, Kachem was summoned to the inner sanctum, a chamber hewn deep into the earth where the boundaries between the mortal realm and the Duat blurred into obscurity. The air grew thick with the heady fumes of incense, mingled with the sharp bite of henbane and the subtle allure of lotus petals crushed underfoot, creating a haze that shrouded the space in semi-darkness, illuminated only by braziers flickering with blue-tinged flames fed by resins imported from the lands of Punt. Amunher, cloaked in robes of crimson linen embroidered with the entwined forms of Set and his consort Nephthys, awaited him at the center, his presence commanding yet laced with a hidden mania that manifested in the subtle twitch of his fingers, as if he grasped at invisible powers just beyond reach. The high priest's voice, when it came, wove into the narrative of the rite like a thread of silk through coarse wool, intoning that this initiation would reveal the sacred union with Nephthys, the goddess of the night and lamentation, whose embrace promised to awaken the dormant energy of chaos within the initiate's soul. binding him eternally to Set's tumultuous domain. Kachum's heart pounded with a tumultuous rhythm as he was stripped of his travel-worn garments. His body anointed with oils scented with amber and musk that warmed his skin and heightened his senses to an almost unbearable acuity. The priestesses emerged from the encircling gloom like apparitions born of the incense clouds, their forms ethereal and voluptuous, draped in translucent veils that hinted at the curves beneath, each one embodying an aspect of Nephthys, the mourner, the protector of the dead, the hidden lover whose sorrows fueled the storms of creation. Their eyes, rimmed with kohl that extended into wing-like patterns evoking the falcon's flight, gleamed with a hypnotic intensity, and their movements were fluid, synchronized to the low thrum of unseen drums that resonated from hidden alcoves, vibrating through the stone floor and into Kachum's very bones. He felt the first stirrings of excitement coil in his belly, a primal fire igniting as the priestesses circled him, their fingers brushing lightly against his flesh, tracing sigils of invocation that tingled like sparks from a distant lightning strike. The ceremony unfolded with deliberate slowness at first, building a crescendo of sensation that mirrored the gathering of a desert storm. One priestess, her hair cascading like the Nile's midnight waters, pressed close, her breath warm against his neck as she whispered incantations that blended praise to Nephthys with promises of ecstatic release. Her hands exploring the contours of his chest and descending lower, awakening responses he could scarcely control. Fear mingled with the thrill, for in the dim light, Kachum glimpsed the high priest's face twisted in a rapture that bordered on madness, his lips moving in silent exhortations not merely to the gods but to some personal abyss, revealing glimpses of an obsession that sought not divine harmony but dominion over the chaos itself, perhaps to bend it to earthly ambitions hidden from the uninitiated. Another priestess joined, her skin pale as moonlit alabaster, embodying Nephthys' aspect of lament, and she drew Kachum down onto a bed of woven reeds strewn with petals, her body arching against his in a dance of seduction that wove magic into every touch, fingers laced with spells that sent waves of energy coursing through him, chaos manifesting as a turbulent heat that threatened to unravel his composure. As the rite deepened, the semi-darkness seemed to pulse with life, the incense thick-ening until visions swam before Kachum's eyes. Nephthys herself appearing in fleeting glimpses, her form shifting from sorrowful widow to insatiable consort, her tears transforming into rivulets of liquid fire that burned away inhibitions. The priestesses multiplied their attentions, one caressing his thighs with oiled palms while another kissed the hollow of his throat, their voices rising in a choral hum that invoked the goddess's name, drawing forth the energy of chaos like a vortex pulling sand into its maw. Kachum's body responded with fervent urgency, excitement surging as he surrendered to the sensual onslaught, his hands grasping at silken veils that slipped away to reveal warm flesh pressing insistently against him, guiding him into unions that blurred the lines between participants, each merge a conduit for the chaotic force to flow unchecked. Yet fear gnawed at the edges of his ecstasy, for he noticed Amunher's gaze fixed upon them not with priestly detachment but with a hungry fervor, his hands clenching the staff of Set as if to channel the rite's power into himself, concealing the true purpose, that these erotic practices served not only to awaken divine energy but to forge bonds of dependency, ensnaring initiates in a web of obsession where pleasure became a chain, and chaos a tool for the high priest's unspoken designs, perhaps, to overthrow rivals or summon forbidden entities from the void. The dynamic swirl of the ceremony intensified, the priestesses moving with increasing abandon, their bodies intertwining with Kachum's in configurations that evoked ancient friezes hidden in forbidden tombs, positions that channeled the goddess's mourning into raw, creative force, each thrust and gasp a syllable in the spell of union. One priestess mounted him with graceful authority, her hips undulating in rhythms that mimicked the Nile's floods, while others flanked them, their hands weaving patterns in the air that sparked illusory storms within the chamber, gusts of wind carrying the scent of ozone and arousal. Kachum's senses overloaded, excitement cresting in waves that crashed against the shores of his restraint, but the undercurrent of fear sharpened his perceptions. He saw how Amunher subtly directed the flow, his incantations laced with personal invocations that twisted the ritual's intent, bordering on a dangerous fixation where the sacred union became a vessel for his own ascent, risking the unleashing of uncontrolled chaos that could devour the temple and all within it. The energy built inexorably, chaos awakening as a palpable force, surging through Kachem's veins like liquid lightning, heightening every sensation until the boundaries of self dissolved in the collective ecstasy. In the Rites' zenith, as bodies slick with sweat and oils moved in harmonious frenzy, Kachem felt the full weight of Nephthys' presence descend, her ethereal touch amplifying the priestess's seductions into a maelstrom of pleasure that bordered on pain, the chaos energy coiling tighter until it erupted in a release that shook the chamber's foundations, cracks appearing in the stone as if Set himself stirred in approval. Yet even in this pinnacle, fear dominated Kachem's thoughts, for Amunher's concealed obsession revealed itself in a fleeting moment. His eyes rolling back in private rapture, murmuring words that hinted at harnessing this power for conquests beyond the spiritual, perhaps to bind the pharaoh's court or summon legions from the underworld. The priestesses, spent yet glowing with the goddess's afterlight, withdrew gradually, leaving Kachem sprawled amid the scattered petals, his body humming with residual energy, a vessel now attuned to chaos but wary of the high priest's hidden machinations. As the incense cleared and the braziers dimmed to embers, Kachem rose with a newfound resolve, the mixture of excitement and fear forging within him a vigilance that would propel him further into the cult's depths. The temple, alive with the echoes of the rite, held its breath as he navigated the corridors once more, aware that this sacred union was but a prelude to greater trials, where the line between divine ecstasy and perilous obsession thinned to a razor's edge, drawing him onward into the heart of Set's stormy realm, where secrets festered like wounds in the desert heat, and the goddess Nephthys wept not only for the dead but for the living ensnared in her name. The days that followed blurred into a tapestry of further rituals, each building upon the last, with Kachem delving into arcane texts that spoke of Nephthys' dual nature, guardian and destroyer, while Amunher's influence grew, his obsession manifesting in nocturnal ceremonies where the boundaries of consent blurred, priestesses pushed to extremes in the name of chaos, their bodies marked with runes that bound them to his will. Kachem, navigating this treacherous path, felt the energy within him stir restlessly, a force that promised power yet threatened to consume, as he uncovered layers of the high priest's deceit. Alliances with foreign sorcerers who brought talismans of alien gods, blending them with Egyptian rites to amplify the chaos beyond control, risking cataclysms that could engulf the kingdom. Through moonlit vigils and sun-scorched pilgrimages to forgotten obelisks, Kachem's initiation evolved into a quest shadowed by doubt, the sensual memories of the union with Nephthys fueling his determination to pierce Amunher's veil. In hidden grottos where the Nile's tributaries whispered of ancient floods, he participated in lesser rites that echoed the grand ceremony. Intimate unions with solitary priestesses who embodied Nephthys' sorrow, their tears mingling with sweat and acts that awakened subtler chaos, visions of crumbling empires and reborn storms. Yet always, the high priest lurked, his obsession bordering on mania as he collected artifacts infused with the rite's energy, hoarding them in vaults sealed with blood oaths, his true purpose emerging in fragments. To summon Nephthys in corporeal form, not for worship but for subjugation, turning the goddess into a weapon against Seti's heirs. Kachem's fear deepened into resolve, excitement tempered by caution, as he maneuvered through the cult's hierarchies, forging secret alliances with disillusioned acolytes who shared whispers of Amunher's past. A man once banished for heretical experiments that fused erotic magic with necromancy, raising shades that hungered for the living. The sequel of Kachem's journey culminated in a clandestine confrontation within the temple's deepest crypt, where the air hung heavy with the residue of countless rites, and the walls pulsed with embedded chaos. There, amid relics of bone and gold, he challenged the high priest's designs, the energy of Nephthys surging through him in a final, dynamic clash of wills and flesh, bodies and magic entwining in a battle that echoed the sacred union but twisted it into defiance. Amunher's obsession unraveled in the fray, his concealed purposes laid bare as chaos erupted unchecked, shattering illusions and forging Kachem anew as a guardian against the very forces he had once embraced. The temple trembling as the goddess's lament filled the void, a warning to those who would pervert her rites for mortal gain. Thus, the ancient mystical tale wove onward, Kachem's path a thread in the eternal fabric of chaos and order, where excitement and fear danced eternally in the shadows of the gods. Continuation of Part 2. In the shadowed embrace of the rebuilt Temple of Set, where the winds from the Red Land carried omens of impending fury, and the Nile's waters churned with unnatural turbulence, foretelling a cataclysmic storm that loomed over Egypt like the god's own wrathful breath. Kachum immersed himself in preparations for the great ritual, a ceremony of unparalleled magnitude designed to appease the Lord of Chaos and avert the devastation that threatened to scour the two lands clean of life and legacy. The skies had darkened for days, thunder rumbling like the distant roar of Set's beastly form, lightning forking across the heavens as if tracing the veins of divine anger, and the priests whispered among themselves that only through the pinnacle of sexual magic could the balance be restored, merging flesh and spirit in an ecstatic torrent to channel the storm's energy back into the void from whence it came. Kachum, his body still humming from prior initiations, fasted under the watchful eyes of elder acolytes, purifying his form with ablutions of scented waters drawn from sacred wells. His skin rubbed with unguents of myrrh and cinnamon that heightened his senses to the subtlest whispers of the ether, readying him for the climax where priests and priestesses would entwine in a dance of unbridled passion, their unions a conduit for the gods' appeasement. As the ritual's eve approached, Kachum delved into the arcane lore housed in the temple's vaulted libraries, scrolls unrolled under flickering oil lamps revealing the intricate steps of the ceremony. The participants, anointed and adorned with amulets of carnelian carved into phallic and yonic symbols, would gather in the grand hypostyle hall beneath a canopy of stars pierced by storm clouds, their bodies moving in synchronized rhythms to the beat of tambours and sistra, building from tentative caresses to frenzied copulations that mirrored the chaos of creation itself. He learned, through these ancient texts etched in faded hieratic script, that the ritual's heart pulsed with escalating sacrifices. First, the blood of sacred bulls and rams spilled upon the altars to awaken Set's attention, their vital essence mingling with the sweat of the dancers. But as the ecstasy peaked, human offerings would be woven into the tapestry, chosen victims, often captives or willing devotees, drawn into the orgiastic swirl, their deaths timed to the crescendo of passion, where the final thrust of union coincided with the blade's descent, passion and death fusing into a singular act that released a surge of chaotic energy potent enough to dispel the storm's malice and restore the Nile's benevolent flood. Enchanted by a priestess named Merit, whose lithe form and eyes like polished onyx promised divine revelations through the intimacy of their impending intercourse, Kachum found himself drawn deeper into the ritual's web, her touch during preparatory meditations, a brush of fingers along his spine, a whispered vow embedded in the narrative of her movements that through their merging he would glimpse Set's hidden truths, igniting a fire within him that blurred devotion and desire. Merit, embodying the seductive aspect of Nephthys intertwined with Set's consort, guided him through rehearsals in secluded alcoves, their bodies pressing together in simulated unions that teased the boundaries of restraint, her promises woven into the heat of their proximity, assuring that in the ritual's climax, their intimate fusion would unlock visions of cosmic disorder tamed. Yet Kachum sensed an undercurrent of urgency in her allure, as if she concealed knowledge of greater stakes, binding the cult to the throne. Driven by this enchantment and a lingering wariness from his past betrayals, Kachum began to investigate the cult's veiled connections to Pharaoh Seti I, slipping into forbidden archives under the cover of pre-dawn hours when the temple slumbered, his fingers tracing over papyrus fragments that spoke of alliances forged in secrecy. The pharaoh, restorer of order yet tolerant of Set's worship to counterbalance Ammonius' dominance, had sanctioned these rites in times of peril, channeling royal funds to the temple in exchange for oracular insights derived from the orgiastic frenzies, where visions born of ecstasy guided military campaigns against the Sea Peoples and Libyan raiders. Deeper still, he uncovered texts describing forbidden orgiastic practices, rituals banned under earlier dynasties but revived in Avaris, ceremonies where hierarchies dissolved in a maelstrom of bodies, highborn mingling with low in anonymous ecstasy, fueled by potions of mandrake and wine that induced hallucinatory states, leading to unions that birthed prophetic dreams but often spiraled into uncontrolled violence, with human sacrifices not merely symbolic but essential to bind the participants' souls to Set's will, ensuring loyalty to the pharaoh through shared guilt and divine ecstasy. The dynamic pulse of preparation accelerated as the storm gathered strength, winds howling through the temple colonnades like harbingers of doom, and Kachum, now fully enmeshed, participated in the final anointings, his body oiled alongside Merit's, their gazes locking in anticipation of the ritual's core, where the ecstatic dance would commence at moonrise. Priests and priestesses forming circles that spiraled inward, hands linking flesh to flesh, movements escalating from swaying hips to entwined limbs, copulations unfolding in waves that built the chaotic energy like a pyramid rising from the sands. He absorbed the grim revelation that the human sacrifices, selected from among dissenters or foreign spies, would be integrated seamlessly, drawn into the dance's embrace, seduced by the priestess's charms until the moment of union and demise, their life force exploding outward to shatter the storm's hold, a fusion of passion and death that echoed the god's own mythic dismemberment and rebirth. As the hour drew near, Ketchum's investigation yielded a pivotal discovery in a sealed coffer. A correspondence etched on clay tablets linking the cult directly to Seti's inner circle, revealing that the pharaoh himself had partaken in veiled versions of these orgies during his youth, using the forbidden practices to forge unbreakable bonds with his generals, the texts detailing how such rites had averted famines and invasions in the past, yet warning of the peril if the chaos overran its bounds, potentially unleashing floods that could drown the kingdom rather than nourish it. Enchanted yet enlightened, Ketchum stood poised at the ritual's threshold, Merritt's hand in his as the first thunderclap heralded the beginning, the air electric with the promise of climax where bodies would merge, sacrifices would flow, and the storm's fate hung in the balance of Set's capricious mercy, the ancient mystical currents drawing him onward into a vortex of revelation and risk that would forever alter the tapestry of his soul and the realm's destiny. Continuation of Part 3. In the throbbing heart of the Temple of Set, where the storm's fury raged outside like the god's own unleashed breath, battering the sandstone walls with sheets of rain that mingled with the Nile's swollen torrent, the climactic ritual erupted into a vortex of flesh and frenzy, drawing Ketchum inexorably to its core as the boundaries between the divine and the human dissolved in a haze of unbridled ecstasy. The hypostyle hall, vast and columned like the spine of a colossal beast, pulsed with the collective rhythm of priests and priestesses, their bodies oiled and gleaming under the erratic flicker of braziers that spat flames tinted with hallucinogenic resins, the air thick with the mingled scents of sweat, incense, and the metallic promise of blood. Drums pounded in relentless cadence, echoing the thunderclaps beyond, as the participants shed their veils and inhibitions, merging in an orgiastic dance that spiraled inward, limbs entwining, hips grinding in synchronous waves that evoked the chaotic birth of the cosmos from Nun's primordial waters. Each gasp and moan an invocation to Set's stormy dominion, blurring mortal forms into a singular, writhing entity where individual wills surrendered to the divine surge. Ketchum, positioned at the ritual's epicenter upon the central altar of black basalt carved with writhing serpents and phallic emblems, felt the energy coil around him like invisible tendrils. His skin aflame from the preparatory anointings that amplified every touch to electric intensity. His senses overwhelmed as priestesses and priests pressed close, their hands exploring, mouths claiming, drawing him into the maelstrom where ecstasy erased the veil between flesh and godhood. Merritt, the enchanting priestess whose promises had ensnared him, emerged as the focal point of his temptation, her form undulating through the crowd like a manifestation of Nephthys in her seductive guise, her eyes locking onto his with a gaze that whispered of revelations born from union, her body arching against his in the dance's flow, guiding his hands to her curves as the orgy intensified, couples and groups collapsing into heaps of intertwined passion, the hall resounding with cries that fused pleasure and supplication, the divine descending in visions of Set's jackal head looming amid storm clouds, his presence tangible in the heightened arousal that swept through all. Yet amid this erasure of boundaries, where human desires transcended into godly rapture, Ketchum's mind clung to fragments of clarity forged from his investigations, revelations that pierced the ecstatic fog like daggers of doubt. The cult's rituals, these very orgies of sexual magic, served not solely the appeasement of Set but wove into the intricate web of political intrigues at Pharaoh Seti's court, where the ruler, architect of temples and subduer of foes, employed the temple's energies as instruments of manipulation and power, channeling the fear induced by whispered tales of chaotic rites and the sensuality that bound participants in unbreakable oaths of loyalty, subduing enemies through invitations to veiled ceremonies where ecstasy masked coercion, rivals drawn into the fold only to be ensnared by shared secrets and sacrificial bonds. their wills broken under the guise of divine favor, ensuring the pharaoh's dominion over fractious nobles and foreign envoys alike. As the ritual hurtled toward its zenith, the storm outside mirroring the inner tumult with gales that shook the temple's foundations, Kachum faced the pivotal choice upon the altar, where Merit positioned herself atop him, her thighs straddling his, her movements insistent and hypnotic, urging him to complete the sacrifice by uniting his body with hers in the ultimate act, the blade poised nearby for the human offering that would seal the rite. A captive enemy of the state, bound and drugged into compliance, whose death would coincide with their climax, passion and demise intertwining to unleash the chaos energy needed to avert the deluge. Temptations surged through Kachum like the Nile in flood, the promise of divine revelation and power intoxicating, Merit's whispers embedded in her caresses affirming that surrender would elevate him to Set's chosen, part of the eternal chaos that shaped empires. Yet rebellion stirred in his core, fueled by the knowledge that the cult twisted sexual energy not for harmony but for domination, a tool in the pharaoh's arsenal to weave fear through sensuous entrapment, subduing dissenters by luring them into rites that left them compromised, their souls shackled by ecstasy's chains. The dynamic swirl of the orgy pressed onward, bodies cascading around the altar in a feverish ballet of unions, the air electric with the scent of release and the first spills of animal blood from peripheral offerings, heightening the collective trance. But Kachum's decision crystallized in a flash of inner storm, his hands halting Merit's descent as he rose against the tide, rejecting the temptation to merge and sacrifice, instead seizing the blade not for the victim's throat but to shatter the altar's central idol, a graven image of Set that symbolized the cult's perversion. Chaos erupted anew, not divine but defiant, as Kachum's rebellion rippled through the hall, participants faltering in their ecstasy. The storm outside responding with a ferocious intensification that seemed to echo his challenge to the god himself. Winds howling as if Set roared in fury or perhaps approval at the mortal who dared confront the manipulation veiled as worship. In that moment of upheaval, Kachum transcended the role of participant, becoming the harbinger of upheaval against the cult's machinations. His choice to rebel forging a path where he would challenge Set not through submission but through confrontation, unraveling the threads connecting temple to throne, exposing how the pharaoh subdued enemies via the dual blades of fear, tales of sacrificial horrors and sensuality, orgies that bound allies in guilty pleasure, ensuring loyalty through shared transgression. The ritual fractured, priestesses and priests scattering as the divine boundaries reformed in stark relief, human will asserting over godly illusion, and Kachum fled into the tempestuous night, his soul ablaze with the energy he had refused to expend, now a weapon to dismantle the intrigues that festered in the shadows of power, the ancient mystical currents shifting as he embraced not chaos's embrace but its defiance, his journey evolving into a legend of the priest who danced at the edge of ecstasy only to leap into the storm's eye, challenging the god whose rites had ensnared empires. As moons waxed and waned over the enduring sands, whispers in the courts of Thebes and Memphis spoke of upheavals born from that fateful night, where Set's cult splintered under the weight of revealed truths, political intrigues unraveling as enemies once subdued by fear and sensuality rose in quiet revolt, the pharaoh's grip loosening amid omens of shifting sands. Kachum, wandering the fringes of the desert like a nomad prophet, harnessed the chaotic energy within, forging alliances with outcast seers and disillusioned courtiers, his challenge to Set manifesting in subversive rites that purified the sexual magic of its manipulative taint, channeling it toward liberation rather than control. His path a dynamic thread in the eternal weave of order and disorder, where one man's decision echoed through the annals of the gods, reshaping the boundaries between divine will and human resolve in the unyielding tapestry of ancient Egypt's mystical legacy.